do this. And a pretty good weekend for conference championship games on the whole. The Pac-12 on Friday night, the most watched championship game ever for the Pac-12 conference as USC took on Utah. And that was a game where, it was very competitive early on. Caleb Williams gets hurt, and then Utah kind of separates from there, and you saw just how much Caleb Williams mattered to USC all throughout there. But he still gave it a go. It was a fun game, but that ended up pulling in 6.23 million viewers for the Pac-12 title game. But just the title games as a whole, no surprise, SEC with the top number, 10.89 million for the SEC title game between Georgia and LSU. Big Ten just a shade back of that number as Michigan won the Big Ten championship over Purdue, 10-6-9. So your difference of 200,000 people between the SEC and the Big Ten games. The Big 12 with Kansas State and TCU, a 9.41 million mark for the Big 12 title game, and that is an increase from last year. I think you could certainly point to the playoff implications, although Oklahoma State had some playoff implications last year, but not in the same sense of being totally unbeaten and literally like you're in, no doubt, as an undefeated if you win that game. And I think just TCU's journey in general, but 9.4 plus million viewers, most watched Big 12 conference championship game since 2018. It was up 15% versus last year, and at one point peaked at 12.7 million viewers. So a lot of people enjoying the contest on Saturday, and I enjoyed it as well. It was a hell of a football game, man.
And look, the numbers as it comes out, the Big Ten and the SEC are up in the 10 millions. There's not much disparity between those top three, really. And you look at the Big 12, they're a million. That's a disparity. I get it. But if you're telling me 10 million people watch one game and 9 million watch the other, as a TV exec, I'm happy either way, right?
Yeah,
I can't be like, oh man, how do we get those other million? You work on that later. Look, the Pac-12 and the ACC, their games combined. Now, look, the ACC game was terrible.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, it had no implications on anything other than who goes to the Orange Bowl. So I think that ultimately hurt it. And the Pac-12 game, I was surprised, only had just under 6 million viewers on it. I was a little surprised on that one. But, it was Friday night. I don't know what the difference is on Friday night ratings versus Saturday morning ratings, but it was all by itself. So it still kind of surprised me that one was a little bit lower.
Yeah, I saw John Kurtz, who covers Kansas State, make a comment, and I think it kind of went like mini viral, in the college football world, kind of viral about like how the Pac-12 had their biggest brand in USC, and they only managed a number that, was 3 million short, not to mention they were standalone basically by themselves. But it was still the most watched Pac-12 regular season, the Pac-12 championship game in the 11-year history. So, people can say, why wasn't it more? But it was the most they've ever had for the 11 years that they've done it. But, I also do get that. Yeah, you were by yourself on a Friday night with USC and with a great team like Utah.
Heisman Trophy contender.
So I understand where they're coming from. The previous high, for what it's worth, was 6 million for Oregon and Arizona back in 2014. So it had been a while since they had scratched that 6 million, and just a shade over that for Utah and USC. But interesting numbers nonetheless for that one. Meanwhile, so you had 10-8, 10-6 for SEC and Big Ten, 9-4 for the Big 12. A massive drop-off to the Pac-12 of nearly 3 million people, which is why we were talking about that. ACC, 3.47, so a little over half of the Pac-12 audience for the ACC game, which, as you mentioned, was not the most competitive or the most entertaining game between Clemson and North Carolina.
Oh, look, and I think the factor is, that game in primetime would have done well if it had any implications on anything.
Right.
If it did. It didn't. And
even if you're like, well, what about Clemson? No, they weren't. That wasn't happening.
Yeah, Clemson's a big brand, but I think that the last 2 years have kind of put them in their place. I do think that the ACC, and I know this, the ACC really, really wants their Florida schools, of which there is a lot more interest and a lot more population than there is in South Carolina, to get good again.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. They need it. They need it to be able to sell their brand overall and to keep those schools interested, because they're locked into this stupid grant of rights forever. And right now, ESPN, they couldn't even make the argument to ESPN. Like, hey, can we redo this because this is not market value right now? I know there's a lot left on it. Like, even in good faith of ESPN going, yeah, you are a little underpaid. We want to be good business partners and let's see what we can do. There's no argument for it right now. There's just not, outside of, one-off games, in the league between some of the bigger brands that go back to the 80s and 90s.
So of the Power 5, if you will, and I know that most are already saying Power 2 or whatever, but of the Power 5, 10-8, 10-6, 9-4, big drop-off from the Big 12 to the Pac of about $3 million to 6.2, and then half that to get to the ACC at 3.4. So
how did the American game do? I thought
that went 2.7. So that was 2.7 million for UCF and Tulane, which is a great number for them, and nearly scratching 3 and like 700,000 away from the ACC title game.
Yeah.
So that's significant that they were less than $1 million away from Clemson, North Carolina, but also kind of daunting if you are the ACC. The Mountain West 1.94, MAC 721K, SWAC got 391K, Sun Belt 332K for what all of that is worth. And just a couple of other notes here.